Hey all. So, as promised, I'm doing this guide on Torch now. Unlike a lot of my other guides, this is not because I think that Torch is underappreciated or anything. He is, and will continue to be for the foreseeable future, an absolute workhorse in the high tier Alliance War, and he is very often a top option for new champions in CAV-EQ bosses or in content. There's always at least a couple lanes in each new story content or any variant where he's allowed, where he absolutely dominates. I mean, I don't think I need to sell Torch to you. However, in my time since I got him and ranked him up, I have run into a fair number of players across different levels who have either said in passing or come to me and basically said, I don't get it. I know Torch is really good, but every time I try and use him, I don't get the results I want. It doesn't work out. Like, I feel like he's not doing enough damage, he's taking too much damage. What am I missing? And my intent here was to kind of clarify that. But one thing that I realized the first time that I tried to record this little speech was that part of the problem is how Torch's abilities are laid out in game. Because what I normally do for these guides is I just kind of read through the abilities, and that usually does it. I talk about like what implications the abilities have as I go, and that's usually good enough for me. But with Torch, I was running into an issue where I kept having to reference different parts of the abilities and cross back over each other, and I was getting confused myself, despite having used him in high tier war for over a year now. And like I said, I think that's the issue, that just the way all he can do and what it links together is presented in game doesn't really give you the best picture. So I'm going to try and come at that another way. So to start with the obvious here, Human Torch applies Incinerates. He wants to apply as many Incinerates as possible. That seems fairly obvious. He places them on his first medium, his first light, and then his second medium or his fourth light. Now, because those two are mutually exclusive, either the fourth light attack you throw or the second medium will end a combo. This means that you're looking at 3 Incinerates per combo. And he, of course, can also apply 2 via his heavy. But to just focus on the combos there, this leads to the popular perception that Torch is a medium light, medium champion, kind of like the way that most people play Corvus Glaive. And that is true to an extent. You'll see in a lot of my videos, I do default to medium light, medium in a lot of situations. However, unlike Corvus, there is no downside to mixing up your combo and extending it, actually finishing it. And so depending on where your power is, any timing concerns, something like encroaching stun on the node, where the opponent's power is, the spacing that you need, all of those things can be accounted for by adjusting your combo length, which you should be doing with most characters. But the point I'm making here is that even though Torch is a medium light, medium champion, he is a lot more flexible than that moniker usually implies. It's also worth noting that he has baked into his Incinerates an effect not all Incinerates have. All Incinerates have block proficiency and remove perfect block chance. Torch's Incinerates also reduce regen by 20%. This is why he's probably the single best counter to Abyss Deadpool, and in general is just a really good option for reversing healing. And we see that the base strength and duration for these Incinerates is 600 damage over 3 seconds. Now, if you haven't realized this yet, in-game when we see damage over time effects, the tick that we refer to, every time the number pops up on screen, that's actually every half second. So that's in 3 seconds, you'll see 6 damage ticks, 6 little red numbers. So 600 damage over 3 seconds is about 100 per tick. That's not a lot for a rank 3. I mean, you are usually going to be doing, unless the opponent has significant resistance or armor or something, you're probably going to be doing, probably close to 1,000 on your non-critical hits just with your basics for most rank 3s. On crits, you expect to see numbers in the, mid to low thousands. So, how do these incinerates add up to one of the highest DPS champions in the entire game? Well, he has tools to boost both the damage and the duration. I like to focus on duration first, and we'll kind of get to why a bit later. But for duration, you want to think temperature. Because when his temperature is at 20, his incinerates last for 4 more seconds, so up to a maximum of 7, as opposed to the 3 he starts out with. In basic fights, temperature is only going to increase when you throw your heavy, and it will increase more if you charge the heavy, and when you throw your special one. And it will then fall off very quickly. Now it does lock in for a few seconds when you hit 20, before resetting to 17 and then dropping, and it also pauses a bit when you throw the special one. The special one will increase it by 5 and then hold it there for 6.5 seconds. So both of those help, but with how quickly temperature falls off in most fights, those effects just are not going to be enough unless the AI behaves perfectly, which, you just cannot rely on. So the way we fix that is mainly with Smoulders, because temperature will fall off more slowly for every Smoulder on Torch and every Incinerate effect on the opponent. But the thing is that the way temperature seems to be calibrated is that temperature's fall off rate seems to be set at a baseline that kind of takes into account a few incinerates. So Smoulders are really the key. These are incredibly easy to build in fights against champions with energy attacks or against mystics. This is why he's famous for those kinds of fights, because when you block a hit, or hopefully not, are hit by an attack that deals energy damage, or any attack from a mystic champion, you gain a Smoulder and your temperature goes up by 5. And remember what we said earlier, that temperature locks in at 20, so if you block 4 hits, even if you're at 0, you are now at 20 and locked in at that temperature for a little bit, and you have 4 Smoulders, so when it drops back down to 17, your temperature will drop off much more slowly. Then hopefully you can go for a heavy or an L1, you get it right back up there to 20, maybe you block some more hits. This is why he cascades in those kinds of fights, because pretty quickly you just stop worrying about temperature. Now, in fights where that is not necessarily the case, there are some things you can do. One of the things that you really want to look out for when you're playing Torch is champions that have physical basics, but some aspect of their special attacks does energy damage. An easy example of this is someone like Mysterio or Cyclops. The beams on their special ones, or in Cyclops' special 2, are energy damage, and so will give you Smoulders. So one skill that's really important with Torch is the ability to parry specials, because that will increase your block proficiency, decrease the amount of damage you take, and you'll pick up some Smoulders. And then that has all the benefits we talked about. Now, if you are playing somebody that really has access to no energy damage and is not a mystic, say Thing, because Torch was really popular for a while against Thing on the Polka Dot Power Stunning Reflection node, and it was because he could incinerate Thing and therefore turn off the node and stun him, but Thing doesn't ramp up your Smoulders. So what you have to do in those fights is you have to use Torch's specials, because the special 1 and the special 2, when thrown into block, both build Smoulders. Now the special one, this is fairly safe to do because it builds a ton of distance, pushes the opponent back, you can throw it into block and then still evade or block by the time they come in at you. The special 2 is not safe unless you have the Killmonger synergy, because the animation for it finishes you right in front of the opponent, and if you throw that into their block, 9 times out of 10 or more, they're just going to hit you in the face afterwards. Now I mentioned the Killmonger synergy, that's because if you have Killmonger on the team, then attacks will miss against you for a short window after that special 2 finishes if the last hit is into a block, and so you can save yourself. That's quite nice. The special 1 gives you 1 Smolder only when thrown into block, and the special 2 gives you 2 Smolders only when thrown into block. Now the special 3 is helpful here because in some fights you don't necessarily want to be throwing a lot of hits into block, or the AI just isn't cooperating with you. That same Thing fight that I mentioned, if everything goes perfectly, you can often end up throwing those special ones into his block, but because rock stacks can kind of complicate things, I sometimes would elect to just build all the way to the special 3, because as we know, it's unblockable, and there are no conditions on it. It just gives you 2 Smolders. Now that's 2 Smolders for 3 bars instead of 3 Smolders for 3 bars if you used that power on 3 different special ones. But it's guaranteed, and you don't really have to finagle with the AI to do it, you just get it. So it's quite safe, and it also has other benefits, which we'll get to in a little bit. Now, one other way that you can build Smolders is when an effect tries to incinerate you. Now, this does not give you temperature, but it will give you a Smolder, and it will happen every time that happens. So the funniest instance of this is usually when you're fighting a Mephisto, because his aura of incineration counts as an incinerate effect every half second. Remember, we talked about damage over time effects tick twice per second, and so every half second with Torch, you'll be gaining another Smolder as long as you're close to him and he has his aura up. Overall, regardless of how you pick up those Smolders, when it comes to stabilizing your temperature and keeping the duration up, even a couple is going to make a big difference. If you have 2 or 3 Smolders on Torch, you are going to feel like you can make headway. So now to get to the other half of the equation, we have to talk about how you get the damage of those incinerates up. Because even if they're lasting twice as long, you're still, like I said, at base looking at about 100 per tick, which is not a ton. The damage of those incinerates is increased by 12% for each incinerate or smolder on either champion, which, because Torch is immune to incinerate, means every smolder on him and every incinerate on the opponent. This is what gets things truly nutty, because if you're able to keep your temperature up, your incinerates are lasting for 7 seconds instead of 3 seconds. If you're keeping your smolders up, then they are also doing extra damage, both for every incinerate on the opponent, which, remember, there will be more incinerates on the opponent if they last longer, because you will be applying new ones before the old ones have fallen off, and more damage for your smolders. This is how both of those factors kind of work together, because if you had, say, 0 temperature and 5 incinerates on the opponent, then you're doing, what is that, 60% extra damage when you then land a 6th incinerate. But if you apply those 5 incinerates when you have 20 temperature, and they're still around when you now apply your 8th or 9th incinerate, which is not exactly how the timing normally goes in fights, but just walk with me through this theoretical here, then that 10th incinerate will be doing 108% more damage, not 60%. And that's the kind of calculus that happens behind the screen. You don't really need to keep track of the numbers, but like I said, that's just how both duration and damage compound together to get Torch to just truly insane levels of DPS. At this point, I should probably just mention, because we haven't yet, Torch is of course immune to Cold Snap and Frostbite. That's nice. Doesn't come up a ton, but it does make him very nice for certain energy adoption lanes, because he's immune to those and he benefits from the ones that try to incinerate him, as we talked about. To just touch on the specials real quick, Like I mentioned with the special one, its main use is to build Smoulders when you throw it into block, or to build temperature. If you just are having trouble finding spots for heavies, but you do have some Smoulders, and you can chain some special ones, the fact that it raises temperature by 5 and then pauses it, as long as your temperature isn't falling off too much, you can get to 20 that way and stay there. And so, in certain fights, the special one is actually very important to your damage output. But often, in my experience, it's where I go for Smoulders if the fight's safe, or I'm using it to build space because it does that very well. It's not really a source of damage. But once you're ramped, I tend to go for the special 2. I almost never throw the special 2 into block, like I said. Pretty much only if I have that synergy. But the special 2 will also apply 2 incinerates and inflict a nice long stun. And that stun is really nice because you usually are going to use it to charge heavy and then place a few more incinerates. And so that keeps your temperature up, and that goes into everything else we talked about. And then I talked about the special 3. The special 3 is good for those 2 guaranteed Smoulders. It's great for spacing because it will get you out of the corner. But the other thing it does is that it puts you into your Nova form. As it says here, you can also go into Nova form when your temperature is maxed out at 20, and there are 7 incinerate effects, so debuffs or passives on the opponent. And while he's in Nova form, all of your incinerates are replaced with these Nova Flame passives. So Nova Flame passives do even more to reduce the opponent's block proficiency. Not the biggest deal in the world with Torch, but it is a bit extra damage. They also inflict power stings alongside the damage over time component, and these can really add up in certain fights. And then, like it says, they're also treated as incinerates for all of Torch's abilities, which means that they contribute to the damage stacking, they contribute to him going back into Nova form again, they contribute to healing reversal. They do all the good stuff we've talked about already with these extra benefits. The other thing about Nova Flames is that they are no longer technically incinerates, and so they bypass incinerate immunity. That's rarely going to be something that matters to you in a fight where Nova form is turning on or off, but it's a huge deal when you consider that you can have Nova form on permanently via Torch's pre-fight. So obviously you have to activate this before you go into the fight, but when you do, for that entire fight, you are effectively permanently in Nova form, and you get these extra benefits of 2 extra seconds on all of your Nova Flames and an additional 75% damage. So that's kind of like half of the benefit of having your temperature at max, and the damage bonus of another 5 Smoulders, effectively. This is often used to let Torch blitz particularly dangerous fights because you don't really have to ramp as much, but you can also use it to take some fights that he otherwise would have a lot of trouble with. You can use this to let Torch be at his full strength and then some against Incinerate immune opponents, such as like Void. Because the Nova Flames are passive, they also can't be shrugged, so I have used this in war to let Torch take somebody like Kingpin, who would normally shrug debuffs and punish them, and Torch just laughs at it. So obviously a very powerful ability, but often you only really get to use it once per quest. Now if your Torch isn't duped, then you just only get to use it once per quest, period. If your Torch is duped, then you have a chance to get that persistent charge back whenever you enter a fight at 0, which will include the fight for which you used the pre-fight. Because you use it, his charges go down to 0, you can walk into that very first fight and immediately get it back. I've had that happen, it's very nice. Problem is you can't rely on it. Now as it says here, when this fails to trigger, the chance in the next fight that it will trigger goes up, but you are often not taking that many fights with just Torch. When I was running Abyss with him, I don't think I ever got it back in fewer than 5 or 6 fights, so I had to be really careful where I picked and chose to use it. When you're looking at something like War, I've run the math on mine at Sig 40. I need 7 fights to guarantee I'll have it for the next one. And even if I'm taking 8 or 9 fights in war, I'm usually not taking them all with Torch. So that's why, in my opinion, the dupe often just doesn't matter, because it's not going to come into play when you need it to. There is an argument for feeding Sig Stones into Torch, because at Sig 200, that number of fights you need before it's guaranteed drops all the way to 3, and you can plan around that. I definitely would have used it more in Abyss, and that's not that rare a war or quest path where I could use that, plan on a few more fights, and then plan on getting it back. The problem is that Torch is a science champion, and science is arguably the most Sigstone intensive class. And if you're giving, 160 to 199 stones to Human Torch, that means you're not giving them to Void, Captain America, Infinity War, or any of the other amazing science champs that could really use their SIGs. So I'd recommend against feeding him, but if at some point I end up with a SIG 200, let's say rank 4 Human Torch, I'm going to be really happy. I'm just not planning for it. Now at this point I would like to go into synergies. The most important one, in my opinion, is his synergy with Thing, who I think is still underrated as an attacker and so isn't always brought, but if you have Thing on the team, Torch starts with 2 Smoulders. And I said earlier that even 2, like when you throw that first special 3, make a really big difference. So if you're taking a tough Torch fight and there's any way to have Thing on the team, I've mentioned before how important I think having Reed on the team is for him, and if you recall all of our talk about ramping up temperature and all those other things, you can understand how much 60% of a bar of power free at the start of the fight really makes a difference. I don't normally use the healing side of it because, the smallest revives that you can get in questing content are 20%, so he doesn't get the healing there. And in war, I do not enter fights at below 20% because that would be just asking for a death. But I do think the power gain side of it is quite nice. I did mention the Killmonger synergy earlier. It is also the Captain America Infinity War synergy. Sorry, work. But this one is very helpful for, in my opinion, all 3 members, but especially for Torch because now you can safely throw his special 2 and get Smoulders off of that, or just throw it if you need to throw a special. This has saved my bacon on Encroaching Stun before. Just don't try it against True Focus or somebody who can't miss like Professor X. So getting into the gameplay here, I'm actually only going to show 2 fights. And that's for the reason that I mentioned at the beginning of this guide, which is that there is a ton of Torch gameplay out there. I will link my war video playlist, which has a bunch of it, but if you Google it, there is plenty of other things. The important thing about this guide is if Torch wasn't clicking for you, take the way we looked at his abilities and approach the videos that you see with that in mind. So with this fight, you saw me sitting on the pre-fight stage for a little bit. I had both Torch's pre-fight applied and a White Magneto pre-fight to make stuns passive, which means that both my Incinerates, the power stings that they apply by virtue of being Nova Flames, and the stuns I apply from my parries, all of those are going to be passives rather than debuffs. This was Kingpin on the old Path 8 in war that had Redoubled Determination, so you really did not want to give him a lot of debuffs. He's going to gain those Rage ones on his own periodically while taking damage, but we won't be giving him any others. And as you can see here, Torch is really doing great. Like, this is a low temperature fight. We are countering with heavies in places to try and get it up where we can. We're going for the Smoulders here because, like I said, there aren't a lot of other ways to pick up Smoulders in this fight. We could try and block some specials from Kingpin, but because of Redoubled Determination, that's just not very smart. It's much better to go for the special 3, and now watch how much slower the temperature drops off. Doesn't really matter, we were winning this fight anyway, but it's kind of a nice illustration of what we talked about there. And a really good use case for his pre-fight out of a, quote, standard matchup. Now, this is the Darkhawk and Abyss. This fight has been done many times, but I also think it's a really good illustration of both what makes Torch great and how to use him, and it kind of ties together everything we've talked about. So right at the start, you saw his temperature dropped right down after the one time I threw a heavy, but then he threw his special one, I blocked all 4 hits, picked up some Smoulders, and now it's easy to stay at 20. Similarly, what makes this fight hard for most champions is Darkhawk's healing, but with Torch, you just knock him down to put him into his shield mode and push him to his special 2, which this fight also has a special tech node where every 10 hits he steals all your power. That's what's happening there. That's why it's so easy to push him to his special 2. Darkhawk will throw that, change modes, and heal a bunch. Now, if we don't have at least 3 incinerates on him, then he will heal some up from it. But that's where another aspect of Torch's kit comes into play, which is that, I don't think I talked about this earlier, but above 10 temperature, he cannot miss. So once you have a couple Smoulders up, at this point we have 12, and it's easy to stay above 10 temperature, then you can hit into him immediately and with impunity in his stealth mode. So even though he healed a fair chunk there because he just held on to his special and healed without a bunch of incinerates on him, we were able to immediately punish him and reverse the tail end of it. And then because we had those incinerates on him, then we could parry him and go for a medium, applying 1 incinerate, and then go for a heavy, bringing our temperature back up, applying 2 more, and then reverse the healing as he changed back into shield mode with 6 incinerates up. This fight is also one where running the Despair Mastery maxed really matters. That's why I'm not using the pre-fight, because the incinerates are not doing the damage for us, the reversal of the healing is. And so for that, we want active debuffs, because only active debuffs trigger Despair, and that's what you're seeing here. I'm not playing my absolute best here, I'll fully admit. There we had a nice little heavy counter, but I had a bit of a spell there where I was just missing parries, and it kind of got away from me a little bit. But you see how much damage that does. Like, the incinerates now have climbed up in how much they're doing. We started this fight with them doing, like I said earlier, about 100 per tick. Now they're up to, 300-400, depending on how many we have up when we land them. That's a really big improvement. But the last time we reversed his healing, that was doing like 6,000 a tick. Right there, I intentionally blocked and waited out, even letting the coward timer go and burn some of my skirmish charges, because I had let the incinerates fall off, and so it was better to have him switch modes, or it was better to have him go into stealth mode when he wasn't in shield mode, so he wouldn't switch modes and I wouldn't have to deal with the healing at all. You can go for that, but as you see here, the basic pattern is try and push him to his special 2 with at least 3 incinerates up, ideally 5 or 6. See, 3 still reverses it, but doesn't make it do a lot. But we hit it immediately, and at the end, those numbers get bigger. And then go to heavy him to knock him down. I think there was even an 11,000 in there at one point. That's where the real damage comes from on this fight. So this is not the way that you're going to play every Torch fight, obviously. But you can really see how much the Smoulders help in keeping temperature up, in pushing up the damage of the incinerates, how much keeping his temperature up helps you just not worry about champions that can cause miss, how much the incinerates work to reverse healing. Like I said, this is most of his kit in one fight, and you really have to understand how those fit together to get through this. So if you came into this guide knowing that Torch was theoretically good, but didn't quite get what made him tick, I hope that at this point you get it. And I hope that you are able to go out and make a good use of this incredible champion in clearing your own content, possibly Abyss, in getting through Alliance War more safely, and just enjoying him. Because, like I said previously, although he can be called a like parry heavy or medium light medium champion, I actually find there's quite a bit of flexibility in his use. And most of the time when I'm bringing Torch along, I'm just having fun. I feel like I'm controlling the fight, I'm setting things up to get me ahead, and then he just melts them. He's an extremely rewarding champion to play, and I hope that if you didn't see that, now you do. I will see y'all next time. Take care.